to the Your Pennsylvania Ancestors podcast. This is Denise Allen, and in this week's episode, I share what I learned about my ancestors through journaling current events right now, and also how to find that historical context for your ancestors. I also take a listener question about researching early Germans in Pennsylvania. I'm glad you're here to listen, and let's get on with the show. Okay, first I wanted to just share a little bit about what I learned about my ancestors through journaling right now. Now, of course, I've encouraged everyone to journal what's going on during 2020 because we're going through a lot of events that we don't normally experience in this country. Between the protests going on for Black Lives Matter, the pulling down of statues, the coronavirus pandemic, the presidential election, I mean, really, you could pick anything happening in 2020, and it's just really rich journal entries. Everything about what your family's thinking, what you're experiencing, how you're participating in the current events, how your family's been impacted. It really is something that your descendants will want to read about, and I encourage you to just write about it, interview family members, and really capture what your family has to offer around it. One of the things we as genealogists really, really wish we had of our ancestors is their thoughts and feelings, not only about historical events, obviously that's what I've been talking about, but also what they thought about each other and why they picked where they lived. And, what they thought about their neighbors and what they ate and what they wore. And, there's just so much that we just wish we knew about them. Because obviously who we are, comes from them and who they were. So please take up journaling. Please share it, with yourself in the future, with future descendants. But just really, really write. So what I realized as I was journaling is that I really had not gone deep enough in three specific areas when I'm researching my ancestors. So the first area was around the diseases and epidemics that they experienced in the cities and towns that they lived in. I have a couple excerpts here to read to you from the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. And I'm going to read these to you and give you the links in the show notes, because there's lots of epidemics that journal wrote about, and I think it would help you in your research. So this first article is about Philadelphia's 1918 to 1919 influenza epidemic. And here we go. Scholars are in general agreement with respect to the broad narrative of the outbreak in Philadelphia during the last 4 months of 1918. In short, the first virulent outbreak of influenza in North America occurred in Boston on the grounds of a naval base on or about August 27, 1918, when the first of thousands of sailors reported it. 10 days later, the Navy transferred 300 sailors from Boston to Philadelphia Navy Yard and thereby unwittingly transported the virus en masse to Philadelphia, though the virus was already present among Navy personnel stationed in Philadelphia by the time the Boston sailors arrived. For almost a month, the virus smoldered among the sailors in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, while increasing but comparatively low numbers of civilians also surfaced with the illness in the city. On September 28th, Philadelphia hosted the 4th Liberty Loan Parade, which attracted at least 200,000 spectators out of an official population of 1.7 million. The parade facilitated a broad, rapid dissemination of the virus, followed in a few days by skyrocketing morbidity and a consequently high rate of mortality. Within a week of the parade, Philadelphia experienced a mortality acceleration that was 360% higher than the average American city, and 136% higher than the next steepest rate. As a result, the city morgue and undertakers could not embalm bodies quick enough, and with corpses lying in homes and heaped in cemeteries, huge communal graves filled with thousands of bodies. The number of dead for October numbered roughly 10,000, with many hundreds uncounted. Though another 5,000 succumbed in November and thousands more between December and the end of March 1919, it is the events of October that continue to grip the imagination. So that excerpt is from an article entitled An Epidemic Straw Man, Wilmer Crewson's Philadelphia's 1918 to 1919 Influenza Epidemic and Historical Memory. And it was written by Jim Higgins and published in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography just in January of 2020. I don't think Mr. Higgins realized when he published this article that it was really going to foretell maybe some of the events that we've watched unfold in 2020. You can see that this event has been in the news a lot and how it would have impacted the people that lived in Philadelphia at that time. The article goes on in great detail talking about what the city did and how it affected not only individual behaviors, but also the running of the government at that time. So it's well worth a read if you had ancestors in Philadelphia during that flu epidemic. And I have another article for you for Pittsburgh at the same time. And what I didn't realize, and this is sort of one of those underreported things, because Philadelphia gripped the imagination because of the parade, spreading it, but Pittsburgh actually had a higher mortality rate in terms of the number of people that died per 100,000 people. So second article goes into great detail around Pittsburgh's mortality numbers, but I wanted to read pieces entitled With Every Accompaniment of Ravage and Agony, Pittsburgh and the Influenza Epidemic of 1918 to 1919 by James Higgins. And this one was published in July 2010, also in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. So here's what Mr. Higgins wrote. In 1918, Pittsburgh was only 1/3 the size of Philadelphia, but it was every bit as important as Philadelphia to the war effort. By the end of World War I, dozens of munitions plants and scores of mills and factories dotted suburban Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, while the military ran training camps in hospitals, universities, and parks. During the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Pittsburgh had some of the nation's worst morbidity and mortality rates. Influenza exacerbated, sometimes fatally, pre-existing conditions in people it infected. Pittsburgh's horrendous air quality, the result of coke production and the burning of bituminous coal, was an important environmental factor that contributed to the severity of the illness in Pittsburgh's residents. Besides the city air, Pittsburgh had the worst living conditions of any major city. Most workers and their families lived in 2- or 3-story buildings that were subdivided into apartments. With space at a premium, residents used every floor, including the attic and cellar, for housing. Such crowded conditions contributed to the transmission of infectious diseases. The city's boarding houses provided cheap lodging for single laborers, but unattached men and women could not rely upon family in the event of illness. Pittsburgh's poorest workers sought shelter on the city's hillsides and in the hollows and ravines. Connected to the city by a maze of trails and hillside stairs, the houses in this no man's land consisted of little more than sheds built of refuse lumber and bits of tin and other debris. No municipal hospital existed to aid Pittsburgh's poor when sickness struck. Though about 20 private hospitals, half of them general hospitals, and the rest a mixture of specialist maternity and psychiatric institution, reserved roughly 100 beds for charity cases in a city of nearly 600,000 people. Now that excerpt I read to you really paints a picture of what it was like to live in Pittsburgh during that time. You really get a different picture in your mind of what it was like for them. Again, that was in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. I have the links in the show notes so you can find those specific articles. I would encourage you to go find that magazine It is archived through Penn State, and there's also archives on JSTOR, and both of those are searchable, and you can get down to specific articles relating to geographic regions of the state that your ancestors lived in and during the time that they lived there. It adds to your research not just for depth of knowledge, obviously, that's what I just shared, but it also can help you with those brick wall situations. Details in articles like these can give you names, places, and just the context to know where to look next with your research. As you've discovered, as you go further back in time, not every record on your ancestor is easy as a Google search where you just type into a search box and then get all the records related to them. You need to start doing some research through clustering, using the fan club, the friends, associate, and neighbors of your ancestor. And historical articles can really help figure out more around those people and places so you know where to look next. A second and third insight I had through journaling, and I'm kind of combining these two together because it really had to do with local. I really noticed as I was journaling about current events that I was really hyper focused on local businesses and local government. Now, you know, and I know that when we research our ancestors, we really need to look at the most local form of government to find their records. And in Pennsylvania, that's typically the county level or the city level, in particular with some of our more industrial cities and with Philadelphia. And I knew that logically, but I really have felt it during 2020 at a gut level, at an emotional level. And you perhaps did too. So when it came to the coronavirus, I really got to know the name of everyone locally that had anything to do to manage this coronavirus because, you know, are we quarantining people? Are we doing contact tracing? What's going on? You know, are we protecting nursing home residents? Are we helping people in our inner city? Are we helping people that are migrants? Like, I just became fixated on this locally. As a genealogist, what I realized is I had not done enough work in terms of really getting to know for my ancestors what were the local businesses that they used. You know, who were the shop owners? For my ancestors that own a shop, I have an ancestor that owned a shop in Manayunk, and I realized I have no idea what they sold. And this is ridiculous, right? Like, I need to do that research to figure out, you know, who was my shopkeeper ancestor? Who were they buying from? Who were they selling to? You know, what year exactly did the store open? Did they have a business license? You know, what taxes did they pay? You know, all kinds of things around that can really help unlock who they were. There is a local Manayunk newspaper, and of course it's on microfilm, it's not digitized, and I need to read it. You know, it's become really clear to me that I need to get that paper because it was contemporary to my ancestors. And there's likely things in there, of course, not indexed. It's going to involve me reading at length, but there's going to be things in there about these families and provide some pieces of information that I've been looking for a long time. So I hope that what I learned helps you become a better researcher too. It's one thing to know something logically and know that we should do it. And it's a whole nother thing to actually do it. That's something that became really obvious to me during these past few months. Now I have a question that came in to my website. If you have any methods for dealing with those 1700s era PA German Swiss brick walls, I'd love to hear them. I have so many branches that end with a person born 1730 to 1760 in Southeast PA. With these early Pennsylvania German families, they settled in a couple areas surrounding Philadelphia. And really the research that you do depends on, to some extent, on the county that they lived in. They did settle by religious preference in the counties. So those religious records might help you in terms of determining parentage. I don't have enough details to say to really guide you, but I would encourage you to get to that county level record. There's also a lot, and I mean a lot, of genealogy work that's been done and is sitting on shelves at genealogical societies and historical societies. That work is not on the internet and will probably never get on the internet. But in those records would be some names and dates and sources to help you further your research along. So when you get to that county level, you can contact the local county genealogical or historical society to see what already compiled family histories that there are. The other thing at that county level, that if I was going to start and there wasn't already a compiled genealogy to start with where I could then look for the records, I would start honestly with probate records and land deeds in those counties and just pull the records for that surname that I'm looking for to start with and see if I can start reconstructing families. The other book that is really invaluable to Pennsylvania German research is the Strausberger and Hink Pennsylvania German Pioneers. It's a 3-volume set, and I would encourage you to read the entire preface. You really have to read the methodology by which they compiled these 3 volumes and what's inside. And it explains what's there and what's missing inside this record set. But it is a pretty definitive list of everyone that came from a German-speaking country. Now, chances are your German ancestor in southeastern Pennsylvania came through the port of Philadelphia. It was the busiest port in the early 1700s. Start combing through that list. And then the last thing to do with those early Pennsylvania Germans is really start to understand the history of German immigration during that time. Who was coming over? Why were they coming over? What areas of Germany did they leave from? I'm assuming you're trying to get back to that area of Germany in your research. So sometimes you can, depending on the surname and the time that they came, really narrow it down to just a couple areas within Germany where they likely came from. Zoe, I hope you find those Pennsylvania Germans. I know you're going to learn a ton about early Pennsylvania history in the process and where they came from. I'll have a link to the Strausberger and Hink guide in the show notes. It is digitized on Internet Archive. And again, anyone listening who wants to learn about how Pennsylvania Germans came in, who they were a little bit, how their entry was recorded, definitely read the preface of that book. It goes into great detail. This is Denise Sallin. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Your Pennsylvania Ancestors podcast. Next week, I'm going to have an interview with Charlie Adams of Berks History, formerly known as the Berks County Historical Society. And if you have any comments or questions or more feedback, I can be reached through my website, paancestors.com. Thank you.